Hey everyone, this is Scruffy from Stormfate.com. Today, we're going to take a look into our 4th guide of the Dragonflight Mythic Plus on the beta Shadowmoon Burial Grounds. We walk you through the whole dungeon and explain all the important cues for the 4th out of 8 dungeons from Dragonflight Mythic Plus Season 1. But before we start, I would love to ask you to give this video a like or dislike, smash the subscribe button, and visit our guide website Stormfate.com. And without further ado, let's hop into Shadowmoon Burial Grounds. Shadowmoon Burial Grounds is an old dungeon from Warlords of Draenor, which is now getting implemented into the Dragonflight Season 1. This dungeon hasn't seen too many changes, but we are still going to provide you an up-to-date version of this guide. On your way to the first boss, you will encounter multiple trash packs containing a Shadowmoon Bone Mender and reanimated Ritual Bones. The Bone Mender will frequently try to heal the reanimated Ritual Bones, which has to be interrupted. Reanimated Ritual Bones use Void Slash, which hits the tank and the closest ally to the tank in the 15 yards range. Otherwise, you will encounter Void Spawns, which use Void Ports to deal AoE damage to all party members. But this time, it can no longer be interrupted. Healers have to just compensate it. Additionally, make sure to dodge the little swirlies on the floor. In almost no time, you will already reach the first boss, Sadana Blood Fury. She packs 3 important abilities and a regular tank-specific ability. Death Spike is used on tanks to deal heavy damage, and this works as a buff on the boss. Tanks make sure to track whenever Sadana has this buff on her, and use defensives to mitigate incoming damage. Daggerfall spawns Void Zones on random players' location, which remain for a long time on that position. Stepping into the Void Zone deals periodic damage, and players should position themselves wisely to leave enough space in the boss area. Dark Communion spawns an ad far away from the boss, which travels to Sadana Blood Fury. Whenever the ad reaches the boss, she will heal by 10% of her maximum health and gain a 20% damage buff until the end of the fight. Use crowd control and focus this ad down as quick as you can. Dark Eclipse is whenever Sadana Blood Fury teleports to the middle of the room. She will cast for 5 seconds and deal almost deadly damage to all players who are not affected by Lunar Purity. To gain Lunar Purity, players have to walk into the white runes on the middle ring on the floor. They slowly start spawning whenever the floor gets darker and darker, so players should prepare even before they can see the runes on it. Oh, and Whispers of the Darkstar is just a channel that deals damage to all party members, which also has to just be out-healed by the healer. After Sadana Blood Fury, you will find barrels on the floor, which will spawn Exhumed Spirit whenever you step over these, or whenever a Shadowmoon Exhumer engages into combat. There are only a few of these between you and the next boss already. Make sure to deal with their mind control, interrupt their spellcast, especially whenever they use Rending Void Slash. Nullish is already the second boss in Shadowmoon Burial Grounds. Nullish will frequently use Planar Shift, teleporting to the location of a random range player, and afterwards it will use Void Vortex. Void Vortex creates a circle around the boss, which deals damage to all players inside of it. During Void Vortex, all players are drawn into the center of the boss. Use movement cooldowns to run away from him. Void Blast is a frontal cone towards the tanks, so tanks should always make sure to aim the boss away from the group. Players should therefore also make sure to not stand in front of him. Void Devastation rains down many Void Zones for 15 seconds, which deal damage to all players hit on impact, and periodic damage to players inside of it. Last but not least, Nullish will use Soul Steal, which brings every player into their own phase where they don't see any other party member. They have to kill an ad, which can be right-clicked after defeated, to grant player a returned soul buff, granting them 40% damage and healing none for 20 seconds. One little advice we have for this moment. This can overlap with your current Thundering timer, and you will be stunned if you were unlucky to time Thundering. This might be hotfixed in the future though, but just keep that information in the back of your head. The spiders and bats you encounter after Nullish are very deadly. The bats will use Plague Spit on all players, reducing their movement speed per stack. They have a very fast cast time and almost no cooldown on this ability. Make sure to use as much crowd control as possible and don't over-exaggerate pulling too many enemies at the same time. The spiders will attack the tank with Death Venom, dealing heavy damage to him, and they use Necrotic Burst. This explosion deals damage to all party members, which can become very deadly. It deals periodic damage to all players and reduces their healing received by 25% per stack. Just before the next boss Bone Maw, you will engage with 2 carrion worms on the bridge to the boss platform. They use a frontal cone body slam to knock players off the platform. If you end up in the water, use the water jets to get out of it. In the water, you are petrified and cannot use spells. Make sure to avoid adding the bats into the carrion worms if your group lacks enough crowd control, because their Plague Spit will slow players' movement speed, which increases the likelihood to be knocked into the water. Bone Maw is the second to last boss of this dungeon. Batted Spit is Bone Maw's regular ability, which hits the closest player to him. Whenever there's no player in close combat to Bone Maw, he will spit uncontrollably to random players. He will also use Body Slam, like the Carrion Worms before, just make sure to dodge this ability. Corpse Breath deals moderate damage to all players, but also leaves Necrotic Pitch under a random player's location. Stepping into these void zones reduces the player's movement speed by 75%. This becomes an important blessing whenever Bone Maw uses Inhale. He channels Inhale for 5 seconds, drawing all players into him, and then throws all affected players into the water. To avoid getting drawn in, players must run quickly into those Necrotic Pitch void zones on the floor to be safe of this Inhale. After the first Inhale, the boss dives into the water and spawns on a different location of the boss platform. 2 additional Carrion Worms will also spawn into the fight, dealing similar abilities as Bone Maw. They will use Body Slam and Fetid Spit, but they don't use Inhale or Corpse Breath. Depending on your group, you can potentially avoid killing these and just out-heal the extra damage granted to your group by Fetid Spit. If you want to play safe, make sure to focus them down and continue with Bone Maw. 2 more bats and 2 spiders are located just after you defeated Bone Maw. They will use all their casts like Necrotic Burst or Plague Spit. Make sure to kill them quickly and use as many crowd control abilities as you have. And at last, just before the portal to the last boss Ner'zhul, you will encounter 2 void spawns, the same ones as in the entrance in the dungeon. Focus one of them quickly to not take too much damage of void burst at the same time, and continue dodging the little void zones on the floor. Ner'zhul is the final boss of this dungeon and only has 3 abilities. Omen of Death spawns a void zone on the location of a random player, which deals periodic damage as long as it persists. The further you are away, the less damage you take from it. Malevolence is a frontal cone in a random player's direction, which has to be avoided. So far so easy, but now he's annoying us with our favorite ability that we loved so much during Sanctum of Domination during Shadowlands. Ritual of Bones spawns a wall of balls, enemies, which leave a deadly void zone behind them. Players have to make sure to focus and kill one of these adds to create a path in which you can walk past them, just as during Pain Daddy. Repeat all abilities until Ner'zhul is dead. So, Shadowmoon Burial Grounds is not our favorite pick for the Warlords of Draenor dungeon, making its comeback for Dragonflight Mythic Plus. During the time of writing the script for this guide, many enemies in this dungeon are casting too fast and too frequently, making for example the bats and spiders way too deadly. We would highly assume this is going to be nerfed in the future, but we would advise players anyway to use their crowd control talents in this dungeon as much as they can. Tell us in the comments how much you like the Shadowmoon Burial Grounds making its comeback for the next 5 months in Dragonflight Mythic Plus. And don't forget to leave a like or dislike and smash the subscribe button. If you are interested in the written version of this guide, don't forget to visit Stormfate.com.